Hello, BookTube. I was watching a video today. Of course, I do a lot of BookTube watching. I watch a lot of BookTube. I don't comment to the extent that I should. I don't leave what you so-called a footprint as much as I should. I never know what to do about that because I never know whether or not the person whose video I'm watching would appreciate a comment from me. I'm not saying my comment would be snotty, but there are a lot of people who don't like me. Even in BookTube, there are a lot of people who don't like me. So I don't know whether or not they'd appreciate a comment. They might not. So that kind of wariness makes me, I think, over-wary. It's a free country still. I can leave a comment if I want. If you don't like it, you can remove it. But I was watching a video earlier today by Christopher Russell, our little corner BookTube's own cartoon hedgehog, who did a video on 6 nonfiction books that he likes, that he can recommend. And my first response was exactly the same as if I have not made 9,000 videos. I saw that video and thought, ooh, are we recommending books? That's how little nudging I need to recommend books to you. It's just that. So I'll leave a link to his video. Lots of he is a self-confessed new reader. I am not. I am not a new reader. But he stuck to nonfiction, so I'm going to stick to nonfiction. I want to just recommend a few books to you. If he can do it, I can do it. So the first one I want to recommend is by William Philpott, who, for you nonfiction readers, especially you World War I guys, you don't want to be a Civil War guy, you might be a First World War guy. Philpott will be known to you because he wrote a great book. He wrote a book called Three Armies on the Somme. That really is, if you were to make a 15-book list of World War I books, general interest World War I books, general interest reader, popular reader World War I books, Three Armies on the Somme would be on there. But this one is also really good. He did a book called War of Attrition about fighting the First World War. Far more in the trenches, quite literally, far more granular, and really good. I don't see this. Three Armies on the Somme is referenced all the time. People talk about it. It was a hit. I don't see this referenced as much, and it's a really good book on the First World War, on what it was like to be there as a soldier. Then this next one is by James Barea. And it is My Backyard Jungle. It's yet another one of those books where it's a nature appreciation, a naturalist book, but examining in minute detail and studying at night and at odd hours the natural environment that you are most likely to have access to, which is your own property, your own backyard. Rather than going out into the Serengeti or into the forests of the Pacific Northwest. I always find these books fascinating. I have been to the wild places. I've been to the world's wild places. But I've also had and been fascinated by the wildlife that shows up out your back window. I always find that fascinating. I actually have a family of raccoons that lives in a tree up on the hill behind this house. So I know their comings and goings. I know their behavior quite well. But there are lots of others. This particular neighborhood has there's a big arboretum nearby, a big natural area nearby, but there's also, unbeknownst to a lot of people who live here, a subterranean river through a large part of this area. So my area has a lot of voles. You can Google what a vole is. I have a lot of voles. I also have a lot of rats. There's a lot of mistaken identity between those two things. At a quick glance by someone who doesn't know anything about what they're looking at, a vole and a rat could look very similar, look like the same creature. And lots of others. We have owls, we have hawks, there are wild canids. And there's also, I just learned, at least one feral cat. And where there's one feral cat, there are bound to be others. Plus birds. So I have an active assortment of people to look at. And that's a lot of fun. And this author does a wonderful job with that, with describing what that's like and how these animals have adapted to garbage cans and back porches and basement bulkheads and work sheds and whatnot. And I can identify with all of those, all of them, all of the non-human and non-canine animals that live in my area have adapted to every inch of it. I've been here for a long time. Everyone in the back area, the hills, the bushes, the trees and whatnot, everyone knows that I am not to be feared and that I am a regular source of food. So I've had a chance to examine a lot of these creatures, in addition, of course, to squirrels. Squirrels don't Squirrels aren't skittish at all, so my squirrels will actually sit outside the window waiting for me to feed them. So this is just another of those books, but a really good one. Then we have some. This is by Mark Bradley. This is nonfiction. All of mine are nonfiction because all of Christopher Russell's were nonfiction. And I'm just that biddable. So this is A Very Principled Boy, The Life of Duncan Lee, Red Spy and Cold Warrior. This is a spy story. It's a nonfiction spy story about a man named Duncan Lee who was a traitor. He was a spy, constantly one step ahead of the U.S. counterintelligence agencies that would eventually detect him and try to find him and put him up against a brick wall to shoot him, which is exactly what should have happened to his ancestor, Robert E. Lee. He is of the Lee family. He is of the Lees of Old Virginia, all of whom were traitors, all of whom deserved to be put up against a wall and shot. And Bradley makes a great story out of this. There are plenty of books on Cold War spies that are boring. You wouldn't think it, because they often do involve literal spy novel type skullduggery. People barely escaping from armed enemies in crowded train compartments or through elaborate ruses. All that stuff from Le Carré spy novels he took from real life. And Bradley does a great job of that. Oh my God, this book builds in momentum as it goes along so that it becomes utterly gripping by the time you're wondering what's going to happen to Duncan Lee. Then this next one is huge. This is by an author who admits, and who bloody well should admit, that he can go on. And this is religious writing as well. So you have to be in the mood for that. The author is N.T. Wright, and the book is Paul and the Faithfulness of God. And it is huge. It is gigantic. Multiple gigantic volumes. I think the total comes to this Paul and the Faithfulness of God is, technically speaking, one book. But I doubt it could ever be printed as one book. It's printed as two 900-page books. And it's all about Pauline theology. And also, I don't think that Tom Wright would object to this, Pauline preaching. This author, he knows the sources, he knows the scripture, he knows the classical world, he knows the languages, but he's very much a preacher. So you'd have to go into this bewaring of that, but I love the way he writes about Paul. Love it. I think I love the way he writes about St. Paul more than I love the way anyone else that I've ever read writes about St. Paul, and I've read a lot about this figure, who is effectively the founder of Christianity. I love the way N.T. Wright writes about St. Paul. And this is a gigantic helping of that, if you're interested in that. Gigantic. There's a lot more. But Paul and the Faithfulness of God is taken together as one work, it is absolutely enormous. And I think endlessly readable. The only reason I sound hesitant is because I think a lot of the preaching, not the theology, but the preaching that N.T. Wright does about Paul is flapdoodle. There's nothing there in the text at all. I think I like him better when he is leaning on the text, and often his enthusiasm will get the better of him, and he will just fly off, in my opinion, far away from anything that can even remotely be extrapolated from the text. He would argue with that, but it's interesting anyway. If you're interested in the subject, if you're not interested in the subject, definitely don't pick 1,600 pages of exegesis. If you're only mildly interested in St. Paul, you might want to read N.T. Wright's biography of St. Paul, which is not this book. It's much shorter and far more presentable, far more accessible. It doesn't rely so much on getting into the weeds of interpretation or whatnot. So you might want to do that. But if you've done that already and you're interested in it, if you're really interested in the subject, well, this will do you fine. Then we have H.A. Langguth. H.A. Langguth will be a familiar name on this channel for longtime viewers of the channel because he wrote a one-volume history of the American Revolution called Patriots that is great. It is terrific reading. All of his books are really terrific reading. He really knows how to tell propulsive nonfiction that isn't dumb. This isn't Bill O'Reilly type stuff. It's propulsively readable, but it's not stupid. And he wrote a book on ancient Rome. He wrote a book on an extremely well documented and very important historical changeover from the Republic of ancient Rome to the beginnings of empire. So Pompey, Sulla, Caesar. He wrote a book on that called A Noise of War, and it's terrific. It really is terrific. There are, of course, a million books on this particular subject, and a lot of them are very long and very stately. And this is not that. This is, any of you who've read Patriots, even at my recommendation, will know that his books are personality-driven. They're grouped around people rather than times or events. It works really well. He makes it work. There are plenty of authors who wouldn't make it work, but he does. Then we have a book by Ginger Strand. I have an old cover for this that has the number 2 on the cover. That's because it's part of a Discovering America series. You don't need to bother about the number 2. I'm pretty sure that the current version of this book has a different cover. I chose the cover that I knew when I got it. I wrote about this. This is her book, Killer on the Road. And it's about the birth of the American interstate highway system and the birth of serial killers, the burgeoning of the modern serial killer, with the author's working thesis being that those two things go hand in hand, that if you create a gigantic, very easy, very navigable interstate highway system, you will facilitate predators. All they'll need is to spend $150 on a car, 35 cents on a tank of gas, and suddenly their hunting field is enormously expanded, and their possible culpability is gigantically decreased. You're driving a car on the highway, you can drive for 10 hours from your home, drive to an off-ramp road, no lights anywhere, no accountability whatsoever, find a woman in distress, her engine is conked out, find a couple of picnickers, kill them, and drive all the way home. Who's ever even going to know that? Who's even going to know that you did that? This author does a lot of really interesting writing on that subject. I wrote about this. I found an editor who was willing to let me write a piece about this. Little did I guess, I wrote about this probably 15 years ago. Little did I guess at the time that there would come a time 15 years later when someone would commission me to research serial killers. But even when I wrote my review, there are very few serious works of analysis on what serial killers are. But even when I wrote this review, there were some. And a lot of the material that they had gathered, and even just raw narrative accounts of some infamous serial killers, really tended to deny this theory. And still do. I would love to I don't have my copy of this book. I'd love to find a copy of it and give it a reread and see, in light of my vastly increased knowledge, I know a lot more about the subject now than I did when I originally reviewed this book. And I don't think that my quibbles about this book have been undercut. Most serial killers, especially the really prolific ones, are homebodies. They hunt near their home. It's almost always what brings them down. Is that they refuse to do what this book says they do. And so you get a figure like Berkowitz, the son of Sam, was a homebody. and also Ted Bundy. I mean, Ted Bundy traveled, but only because he had to, because he was fleeing the law. But otherwise, extremely local and homebound. And think about Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer was caught, at long last caught, because one of his victims realized, oh my God, it was in the middle of the usual ritual that he had. One of his victims realized, oh my God, this guy's going to kill me. He's going to kill me, and he says he's going to eat me. And actually managed to escape the apartment. But the apartment it doesn't exist anymore. The city authorities very rightfully bulldozed the whole building. But when you look at pictures of it, it was a crappy, cheap apartment building, the type of apartment building plenty of us have lived in. He was storing dead bodies in his 2 rooms. Think about the stench. Think about you don't have to think about the stench because everybody commented on it. All of his neighbors in that apartment complex knew that something was awful. Something was quite literally rotten in one of the apartments. That would have got him caught and arrested anyway. Even if one of his victims hadn't run away, that would eventually have got him caught. Solely because he was a homebody. Solely because he wouldn't go elsewhere with his victims. So I'd love to find another copy of this and read it, but I can definitely attest that it was really good. Now we'll move from serial killers to someone who we don't know she was a serial killer, and that is Louisa May Alcott. We're not sure. This is Anne Boyd Ryu's book, Meg, Jo, Beth, Amy. This is her book about Little Women, about Louisa May Alcott's best-selling book, or American classic, Little Women. This is about all of the false starts. This is about how the book began. This is about how the book was marketed, how it sold. This is the biography of a book. And I love these kinds of things when they're done well, and I know of almost no example of it being done better than this. It's a short book. You're going to wish it were longer. It's wonderful, about all to do with what caused Little Women to come into being and then get embraced. And like all great books on this subject, in fact, I think it's one of the yardsticks you can use to tell whether or not you're reading a great example of something like this. If you're reading a great example of a biography of a book, when you're done with it, you'll have the irresistible impulse to read the book in question. That's not always the case. I know of one particular author, in fact, I know the author, who wrote a book, a biography of a book and a particular author, and it most certainly did not do that. You finish his book if you can crawl your way through it. And the number one thought on your mind is, I will never read the book in question again, never in a million years. But not this. This is just enchanting, just purely enchanting. Then we have Dava Sobel. A lot of you will know this author from Longitude. Longitude was a huge, huge hit. This is a later book. This is The Glass Universe, about the women who examined the glass plate photographs of stars at the Harvard Observatory. That was their job, was just to, we're going to take pictures of these stars day by day. And we have high-profile male professors who are going to theorize about that and try to figure out what all of that means. But they didn't do any of the grub work. They didn't do any of the processing of any of that raw data, and they totally depended on it. Instead, these women did it. And Sobel does a great, great job of bringing all those women to life, of resuscitating them in the scientific record, in the scientific saga of how we advance the art of astronomy. I went into this a little skeptical. I wasn't sure that it wasn't Dava Sobel maybe making a mountain out of a molehill, maybe making a bigger story than was actually there, but I was totally convinced by the end. And again, like with Killer on the Road, I will try to remember to find my review of this. I don't know if it's lost or not, but I'll try to in case you're interested. Then this next one is it's part of a series, Encyclopedia Prehistorica. I forget who publishes this, but a publisher came out with a book, a big, fat children's pop-up book, Encyclopedia Prehistorica. Their first book was on dinosaurs. And it was the art of the pop-up book like the common American book-buying public had never seen before. Of course, the art of the pop-up book has been raised to incredible heights, but not generally in a commonly popular published book from a major publisher. It wasn't expected that would happen. And the dinosaur book took off. Oh my God, it is a miracle of pop-up art. What I mean here is that you open the pages and there's cut cardboard that is constructed so that when you open the page, something pops up and becomes a standalone thing. It's needless to say, that dinosaur book was extremely delicate. These things would come in plastic wrapped bricks, and I was working at a bookstore at the time, and I always used to tell my customers, if you encounter a book on our shelves that's wrapped in plastic, you don't have to ask me. Open it. If we're asking you to pay $30 for a hardcover, you bloody well get to look through it before you do. So open it. And my regular customers, when the dinosaur book came to the store, my regular customers would come to me and say, I know you always tell me just open the book, especially if it's a university press, but should I do that in this case? And I would actually tell them, no, don't do it in this case. We won't be able to sell it. We have one open. The store bought one that's open. If you go to the children's department, and then the children's person will show you what this looks like. But we can't have all of them being opened, or they'll just be destroyed. I mean, kids will destroy them in this section. And they're too nice for that to happen. And all of them agreed. All of those customers agreed with me. And yet I knew right away that I was just pushing at sand, because they're going to get destroyed anyway. The kids are going to destroy them anyway. Which is why this is the only book on this list where I am going to say that if you want this, and you should have this, you should buy it new. go to your favorite book buyer and buy it new. I'm not picking the dinosaur book here. I'm picking Sharks and Sea Monsters, another in the Encyclopedia Prehistorica line. I forget how many of these they made. I think they did one for mammals. And the dinosaur one is a work of art, but so is this. This is incredible. Sharks and Sea Monsters volume is incredible. And don't be tempted to get one used on eBay. It will not be in perfect shape. And this is about so much more than just the pop-ups. There's so much information in these books. And little pockets with little trinkets in them along the way. Better to get one new, wrapped in plastic. And just hold on to it yourself. And also, much as I love the little ones, better to get this without intention of sharing it with a child. Better to do that. Or if you're going to share it with a child, share it with them at arm's length. Let them know they're not to touch it, because you want it to last. They're incredible. And they also, all of the Encyclopedia Prehistorica books also are dramatic. They build to a climax. The final pop-up thing in all of these books is the most dramatic pop-up one. That's always a neat little detail. Then we'll do another book that I've shown you on this channel many times before. This is Gail Christensen. This is In the Presence of the Creator. What, in my opinion, the best biography of Isaac Newton. Who, all of you Doctor Who fans, you new Who fans, will be astonished to learn was a white man. A children's series about introducing children to history. Falsifying history for Twitter points. Incredible. Still amazes me that they did that. But in this book is accurate, completely accurate. And one of the yardsticks that you want, there are two yardsticks I think that you want for a Newton biography. One of those is, does the author do justice to the scientific work? In Newton's case, that is hard to do because he was far, far ahead of any human else on Earth, except maybe Leibniz. But this Gail Christensen does a good job doing that. And in the other is the personal element. Newton has a tendency to disappear. The man has a tendency to disappear behind the genius, and that doesn't happen in this book at all. This is a flesh and blood human being. Just a wonderful book, out of print, I believe, but well worth it to find. This next one is by Bruce Begmill. I may be saying his name wrong. I don't know if he's gone on to write other things, but this is his book, Biological Exuberance. It's his study of homosexuality in the animal kingdom, not just in humans. I'm not quite sure what the decision was for this cover. I think that color display is for a mate who will reproduce. But who knows what ultraviolet stuff is going on there that we don't know about. It's a big book. It's well illustrated. It's well grounded. And it is meant to show what you should be able to tell on your own anyway, which is that homosexuality is not only not a choice, but not restricted to humans. It exists in all animals. And it's fascinating. This author really doesn't bring much of an ideological axe to grind. So it ends up being just an endlessly fascinating story about where this happens, what are the well-documented species, and also why would it happen? Right? I mean, from a purely Darwinian stance, you might think it wouldn't happen, that homosexuality would not happen, because Darwinian evolution, natural selection by, evolution by means of natural selection, is driven a competition for repetition. It's driven to get your genes represented in the next generation. Of course, homosexuality will not do that. But it turns out, again, a moment's thought will make it clear to you. It turns out there are plenty of evolutionary advantages to homosexuality in a especially a communal group. Plenty of them. Enough so that if you had that as maybe a genetic predisposition, natural selection would not automatically weed it out. I think this is great. It is lots of thought provoking. Don't know whether or not it's still in print. And then we can finish up with an older book. This is probably still in print in some form or other. This is by Doris Lund, and it is called Eric. This was a bestseller in its day, probably 50 years ago, and it is her biography of her son, her teenage son, who is stricken with leukemia and lives with it and fights it, and the fights are harrowing, absolutely harrowing. Medicine of the day is described in great detail, and loses. Eric loses his fight with leukemia and dies as a very young man. And Doris Lund fearlessly narrates that. beautifully, fearlessly narrates that whole thing. So, I mean, I don't know if this is in print anymore, but I'm sure it had a huge print run. So I'm sure that you can find a secondhand copy. And it might not strike you as the type of thing that would really work for you, but I bet it will. I bet it will move you. The second half of the book, and especially the last 50 pages, are unbelievably moving. But that's because Doris Lund is so good at building up to that. You'll be involved in Eric's fight to live. You will be. But anyway, sorry to end on a down note. I don't have another book as a candidate. But there you go. Just a handful of nonfiction books to recommend. Just because Christopher Russell did it. That's all. Just monkey see, monkey recommend. So I don't need much of a reason to talk books with you. So there are some recommends for you. So I'll wrap this up. And again, I will remember to leave a link to Christopher's video and a link to any reviews from these books that I can find. But anyway, I'll wrap this up for now. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.